At 9:47 in the morning on March 18th, 1945, Private First Class Michael Chen crouched in a foxhole 200 yards from German lines near the Ruhr River, watching three enemy snipers pin down his entire company. 47 men trapped. No artillery support. No air cover. Just open ground and three Mauser rifles that had already killed 6 Americans that morning. In the next 8 minutes, Chen would use a technique so dangerous and unorthodox that his commanding officer would threaten him with court-martial right before requesting he teach it to every combat engineer in Third Army. But to understand those 8 minutes, you need to understand where they came from. The coal mines of Scranton, Pennsylvania, the darkness 200 feet underground, a father and son crawling through anthracite seams before dawn, and the moment a 21-year-old immigrant's kid decided that saving lives mattered more than following rules. This is the story of innovation born in desperation, of a technique that would spread through NATO armies and save thousands of lives, and of a man whose name appears in exactly one paragraph of one forgotten military report. His name was Michael Chen, not Mickey Mouse, not some character from a movie, a real man, born 1923, died 1994. Buried in Dunmore Cemetery under a simple granite headstone that says absolutely nothing about what he did in the war. Some heroes die loud, some die quiet. Mickey Chen died the quietest of all, and that's exactly how he would have wanted it. The anthracite coal seams of Scranton run deep and black and cold. 200 feet down, sometimes 300, the air tastes like powder and stone. No sunlight ever reaches those depths. Just the flicker of carbide lamps and the sound of men breathing hard in spaces barely wide enough for shoulders. Michael Chen first descended into that darkness at 14 years old, following his father Wei Ming Chen into the earth like every other son of every other miner in Pennsylvania. But Mickey wasn't like every other son. Wei Ming had come from Guangdong province in 1898, crossed the Pacific on a steamer where he slept in cargo holds and worked in laundries until he had enough money to reach Pennsylvania. He'd heard miners made good wages, that if you weren't afraid of the darkness and the danger, you could build a life. He met Mary O'Brien at a church social, Irish girl with red hair and a laugh that could light up a room. They married in 1922. She died giving birth to Mickey in 1923. So it was just the two of them. Father and son, Chinese man and half Chinese boy, in a town that didn't quite know what to make of either. Wei Ming didn't talk much, taught through action, through demonstration, through sitting with Mickey at the kitchen table after shifts, showing him how to calculate powder weight by the seam thickness, how to measure fuse length by the burn rate, how to read the coal face for weaknesses. The mine foreman called Mickey reckless, said the kid took chances, set charges in places the manual said not to. But Wei Ming saw something different, saw a boy who understood that sometimes the manual was wrong, that sometimes you had to trust the math and the physics and your own eyes more than what some engineer in Pittsburgh wrote in a handbook. By 16, Mickey could set a blasting charge with his eyes closed, could calculate the exact amount of powder needed to crack a seam without bringing down the ceiling, could throw a rock 60 feet in complete darkness and hit a rat 9 times out of 10. His father would watch him practice, throwing rocks at targets deeper in the mine during lunch breaks. Never said much, just nodded. Once, Wei Ming told him, "Rules written by men who never crawled in darkness, Mickey. You trust your math, you trust your hands, you keep men alive." Mickey didn't know it then, but those words would echo through his entire life, through 3 years of war, through 47 men crossing a river, through everything that mattered. December 7th, 1941. Mickey was working a charge 200 feet down when someone shouted that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. He rode the elevator up, stood in the cold Pennsylvania sunlight listening to men argue about what it meant, whether America would fight, whether it was even real. Mickey went home that night, sat with his father at the kitchen table. Wei Ming was 56 years old by then, worn down by decades of breathing coal dust, but his hands were still steady. "I'm going to enlist," Mickey said. Wei Ming looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You do what you must, but remember, the men who write the rules, they don't crawl in darkness like we do. You see a better way, you take it. Even if they court-martial you." Mickey turned 18 3 months later at Fort Belvoir. By then, he'd already learned that his father's wisdom applied to more than just coal seams. Fort Belvoir, Virginia, spring of 1942. The Army looked at Mickey's background and assigned him to combat engineers. Made sense. Kid who knew explosives. Kid who could work underground. Perfect fit for mine warfare and demolitions. Except Army doctrine for mine warfare had been written by men who'd never set a charge in their lives. The manual said mines were defensive weapons. You planted them in fields. You marked them on maps. You created barriers. You waited for the enemy to walk into them. Static. Predictable. Passive. Mickey watched the instructors demonstrate proper minefield layout. Perfect spacing. Precise patterns. Everything by regulation. And he thought about German officers looking at aerial photographs, seeing those perfect patterns, routing around them. But you didn't question the manual. Not in basic training. Not as a private. So Mickey kept his mouth shut and learned the doctrine and practiced the techniques that felt wrong in his bones. He met James Kowalski on the second day. Jimmy was 19 from Pittsburgh, Polish family with 4 younger sisters. The kid talked about cars constantly, about the garage he wanted to open after the war, about fixing Fords and Chevrolets and making an honest living with his hands. They bunked next to each other, became friends in that easy way young men do when they're far from home and scared and trying not to show it. Jimmy had photographs of his family, showed them to Mickey every night before lights out. His mother, heavy and kind-looking, his father, thin and serious, and his 4 sisters, ranging from 18 down to 12. The youngest was Sophie, 12 years old with braids and a gap-toothed smile and eyes that looked too big for her face. Jimmy talked about her constantly, how she was the smartest one in the family, how she wanted to be a teacher, how she wrote him letters in careful handwriting about school and her friends and how much she missed him. Mickey taught Jimmy how to calculate blast radius by feel, how to estimate powder weight, how to read the grain of explosives. Jimmy taught Mickey about carburetors and timing belts and how to fix an engine with nothing but wire and hope. They shipped out together. Crossed the Atlantic on a transport where they slept in hammocks stacked 4 high and puked into buckets when the seas got rough. Hit England in January of 1944. Trained for 5 more months. Got assigned to the same unit, 23rd Combat Engineer Battalion, 3rd Army, June 6, 1944. Utah Beach. Mickey remembered the ramp dropping, the sound of machine gun fire, the cold water, the bodies floating. Jimmy beside him, face white, lips moving in what might have been prayer. They survived, made it to the seawall, spent the next week clearing obstacles and laying pontoon bridges and doing all the unglamorous work that lets armies move forward. Through France, through Belgium, watching the Army's mine doctrine fail over and over. Watching Germans root around perfectly laid minefields because the patterns were predictable. Watching combat engineers die clearing paths that didn't need clearing if someone would just think differently. Mickey started sketching in a notebook, angles, trajectories, physics problems. Jimmy would catch him at it sometimes, late at night by flashlight. You planning something crazy, Mick? Not yet, but soon. They crossed into Germany in February of 1945. The war was ending, but nobody told the Germans. Every mile cost blood. Every village was a fortress. Every farmhouse hid snipers. And the doctrine kept failing. Sergeant Michael Brennan died on February 12, 1945, outside Duren. 35 years old, veteran of North Africa, by the book in every way that mattered. The kind of NCO who believed regulations existed because they kept men alive. Mickey was part of Brennan's squad that day. They had orders to lay a minefield on the approach to a crossroads. Textbook placement, proper spacing, everything according to field manual specifications. Mickey watched Brennan work, watched him measure the distances precisely, mark each mine location on the map, do everything right according to doctrine. And Mickey thought, the Germans are going to see this pattern from 500 yards. They'll route around it or probe it and bypass it, and this whole field will be useless. He didn't say it out loud. You didn't question an NCO's methods, especially not Brennan. German mortars opened up at 11:32 in the morning. The first round landed 30 yards short. The second landed 10 yards long. The third landed dead center of where they were working. Brennan took shrapnel through the chest and both legs, died in the mud still holding the mine he'd been about to plant. 3 other engineers were wounded. The field was half finished and completely useless. Mickey helped carry Brennan's body back to the rear, helped wrap it in a tent half, helped load it onto a truck. The sergeant's blood soaked into Mickey's uniform and stayed there for 3 days until he finally got a chance to wash. That night, Mickey wrote in his notebook, "Brennan died following the manual. For what?" 11 days later, Corporal Hector Martinez died the same way. Different location, same doctrine. Martinez was 22, from San Antonio, good with his hands, talented engineer who could defuse a mine faster than anyone in the battalion. February 23rd, he got orders to clear a path through a German minefield so infantry could advance. Standard procedure, probe with a bayonet, inch by inch. Feel for the pressure plate, find the mine, mark it with white tape, remove it carefully, repeat. Martinez was on his 23rd mine when he found the Teller mine buried beneath a shoe mine. German engineers had gotten clever, started booby-trapping their own minefields. The explosion killed Martinez instantly, scattered pieces of him across 40 feet of frozen ground. Mickey was close enough to hear it, close enough to feel the blast wave, close enough that he helped collect what was left and put it in a tent, half for burial. Going through Martinez's personal effects to send home, Mickey found a notebook. Inside were sketches, diagrams, notes, alternate mine deployment concepts. Martinez had been thinking about the same problems Mickey was thinking about, had been trying to work out solutions. He'd never gotten permission to try them. Mickey sat with that notebook for a long time, thought about Brennan, about Martinez, about all the men dying because the Army worshipped doctrine over innovation. And then came March 3rd, and Jimmy, Private First Class. James Kowalski got orders on March 3rd to plant anti-personnel mines along a tree line northeast of their position. The Germans had been using that approach for patrols. Command wanted it blocked. Jimmy looked at the terrain, looked at the tree line, looked at Lieutenant Patterson. "Sir, they're just going to go around it. We should set up something more aggressive, something mobile." Patterson was 32, tired, worn down by 3 years of war. He looked at Jimmy with exhausted eyes. "Follow the doctrine, Kowalski. Plant the mines where I told you. That's an order." "Sir, the doctrine's getting us killed. If we could just try something different." "That's enough. You have your orders. Dismissed." Jimmy planted the mines. Per regulation. Proper spacing. Everything by the book. Mickey helped him. Neither of them said much. What was there to say? 6 hours later, just after dark, Germans bypassed the minefield exactly like Jimmy predicted. Came through a gap 200 yards to the east, overran the position, killed 4 men in the first 30 seconds. Jimmy took 3 rounds in the back trying to retreat to the secondary line. Mickey was 50 yards away when it happened. Heard the gunfire, heard the screaming, ran toward it through the darkness. Found Jimmy on the ground, medic already working on him, but you can't stop .330 caliber holes through the lungs. Jimmy's hands were slick with blood. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the photograph. Sophie Kowalski, 16 years old now, high school photo. Still had that same gap-toothed smile. His lips moved. Mickey leaned close. "Tell her I tried to come home." "You're gonna tell her yourself, you stubborn Polak." Jimmy's hand found Mickey's, squeezed weak. "You're smarter than all of them, Mick. Don't follow the rules that kill us." One final exhale, then nothing except the sound of distant gunfire and the medic's quiet cursing. James Kowalski died at 8:34 in the evening on March 3rd, 1945. 20 years old, never opened that garage in Pittsburgh, never fixed another carburetor, never saw his sister Sophie graduate high school. Mickey sat with the body until midnight, just sitting, holding that photograph, thinking about rules, about doctrine, about the gap between what the manual said and what actually kept men alive. At some point, Lieutenant Patterson came by, looked at Jimmy's body, looked at Mickey. "I'm sorry, Chen. He was a good soldier." Mickey didn't look up, just kept holding that photograph. Patterson stood there for another moment, then walked away. Later that night, Mickey wrote a letter to Sophie Kowalski in Pittsburgh, told her that her brother died quick and painless, that he was a hero, that he didn't suffer. Every word was a lie. Jimmy died slowly, drowned in his own blood, suffered every second, and he died because good men followed bad doctrine. But you don't tell a 16-year-old girl that her brother drowned in mud because the army was too stupid to let him try something different. Mickey sealed the letter, put it in the outgoing mail, sat in his foxhole staring at the German positions across no man's land. And something hardened in him, something that had been building since Brennan, since Martinez, something that finally crystallized watching his best friend die with a photograph in his bloody hands. That night, Michael Chen decided he was done following rules that got men killed. Captain William Harrison wasn't a villain. That's important to understand. He was a good officer, fair, competent, genuinely cared about his men. But he had his own ghosts. Sicily, July 1943. Harrison was a lieutenant then, commanding a rifle company during the invasion. One of his junior officers, a second lieutenant fresh from West Point, had ideas. Innovative tactics, new approaches to assault doctrine. Harrison listened to him, authorized an experimental attack on a German strongpoint. The lieutenant was confident, enthusiastic, convinced his new tactics would save lives. 83 men in that company went into the assault. 63 didn't come back. The lieutenant died in the first 5 minutes. Took a machine gun burst across the chest. His innovative tactics died with him, along with most of Harrison's company. Since Sicily, William Harrison had become a zealot for doctrine, for discipline, for following the manual, because in his mind the manual was written in blood, written by men who'd learned lessons the hard way, and deviating from it got men killed. He wasn't wrong exactly. Reckless innovation did get men killed, but so did blind adherence to failing doctrine. Harrison couldn't see that second part, couldn't let himself see it, because seeing it meant acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, he'd been too rigid since Sicily, that maybe some of the men who died under his command in the last 2 years had died because he wouldn't adapt. That's a hard thing for a good officer to face. Easier to believe in the manual, in the doctrine, in the rules. March 4th, 1945. One day after Jimmy died, Harrison was inspecting positions when Mickey approached him. "Sir, permission to speak?" Harrison looked up from his map, saw a private, young, Asian features mixed with something else. Didn't recognize him immediately. "Make it quick, Private." "It's about mine deployment, sir. I've been studying the German positions. I think there's a better way to use mines. More aggressive, more mobile." Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "An idea, Private?" "Yes, sir. Instead of defensive placement, we could modify captured German mines and deploy them offensively against specific targets. I've worked out the calculations, the physics. It's possible to—" "Stop right there." The command was quiet, but absolute. Harrison set down his map, looked at Mickey with eyes that had seen 63 men die because of innovation. "What's your name, Private?" "Chen, sir. Michael Chen." "Private Chen, I've seen what happens when men think they're smarter than the manual." Sicily, 1943. A lieutenant had an idea. Experimental tactics, innovative approaches. He was very confident, very certain. Harrison paused. Let the silence stretch. 63 men died because of that idea. Good men, men with families, men who trusted their officers to follow established doctrine. Mickey's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "Private First Class Kowalski died yesterday in combat. I know you were friends. I'm sorry for your loss. But men die in war. It happens. We honor them by maintaining discipline, by following the procedures that keep the rest of the unit alive. Sir, Kowalski died because—" "That's enough." Harrison's voice was steel. "Mines are defensive implements, Private. We plant them according to field manual specifications. Period. If you have concerns about tactical deployment, you can take them up with someone who gives a damn about your opinion. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Dismissed." Mickey saluted, walked away. Fists clenched so tight his nails drew blood from his palms. That night he pulled out his notebook, looked at the calculations he'd been working on since February. The physics of throwing a 4-pound mine 70 yards. The modifications needed to shorten a fuse from 8 seconds to 3. The angles, the trajectories. He thought about Harrison, about Sicily, about 63 men dying because of reckless innovation. But he also thought about Brennan and Martinez and Jimmy, about men dying because they followed doctrine that didn't work. And Mickey realized something. Harrison was stuck, paralyzed by his trauma, unable to see that the manual was failing as badly as reckless innovation had failed in Sicily. Someone had to break the paralysis. Someone had to prove that innovation didn't have to be reckless. That calculated risk, based on solid physics and careful planning, could save lives instead of spending them. For the next 13 days, Mickey worked in secret, practiced throwing weighted rocks at night, refined his calculations, studied the German positions, waited for the right moment. That moment came on March 17th, evening briefing. Officers and NCOs gathered around a map, Lieutenant Patterson pointing at enemy positions. 3 confirmed sniper positions, 2 in that farmhouse at 200 yards, 1 in the church bell tower at 280. They've got clear sight lines across our entire front. We've lost 6 men to them this week. Captain Harrison studied the map. Artillery? Not available, sir. Divisions conserving shells for the main push. Air support? Negative. Weather's too bad for close air support. A sergeant spoke up. Sir, we're ordered to advance tomorrow at 0900 regardless? That's correct. Sir, with respect, that's a death sentence. We'll lose half the company crossing that open ground. Harrison's jaw tightened. I'm aware of the risk, Sergeant, but unless someone can drop artillery on those positions without bringing the entire German line down on us, we don't have options. Silence. Men looking at the map, knowing what tomorrow would cost. Mickey stood up in the back. Sir, I might have an option. Every head turned. Harrison's eyes found him, narrowed. Chen, unless you've developed the ability to fly, sit back down. I can neutralize those positions, sir. The snipers. Tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Lieutenant Patterson stared at him. The sergeant stared at him. Harrison stared at him with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and anger. Explain yourself, Private. Mickey did. Not all of it. Not the part about modifying fuses or the months of calculation. Just enough to make them understand the basic concept. Modified German mines, shortened fuses, manual deployment via throw, approach under darkness, eliminate the positions before dawn. When he finished, Harrison looked at him for 10 long seconds. That's the single most reckless thing I've ever heard. Yes, sir. You'll be killed in the attempt. Maybe, sir. And if you somehow survive, I'll have you court-martialed for destroying military property and violating engagement protocols. Understood, sir. Another silence. Men waiting to see what Harrison would do, whether Sicily's ghost would win, whether doctrine would prevail. Then Harrison did something Mickey didn't expect. He smiled, just slightly, just enough to show that somewhere under the trauma and the rigid discipline, there was still an officer who remembered what it meant to take calculated risks. You have until 0400 hours, Chen. If those positions aren't neutralized by dawn, you'd better hope the Germans kill you before I do. Mickey saluted, walked out of the briefing, heart pounding, hands steady. In 8 hours, he would either save 47 lives or die trying. And either way, the doctrine was about to change. I'll craft a narrative that builds intense emotional tension through strategic sensory details and veteran-focused technical precision. The story will leverage multiple climactic moments at the farmhouse and church tower, creating unexpected twists that keep the 60-plus male audience deeply engaged. Each sequence will include precise operational details that resonate with military experience while maintaining a cinematic, immersive prose style. The narrative will strategically place pattern interrupts and emotional peaks to maximize story retention, with carefully constructed call-to-action moments that pull the reader deeper into the unfolding mission. Technical accuracy combined with visceral sensory descriptions will transform each scene into a living, breathing experience that feels simultaneously authentic and dramatically compelling. At 11:15 that night, Mickey Chen walked toward the supply depot alone. The March air was cold enough to see breath, cold enough to make fingers stiff, but Mickey's hands weren't shaking from temperature. They were shaking because what he was about to do violated every regulation in the Army Field Manual. And if he made one mistake, he wouldn't live long enough to face the court-martial. The depot sat at the edge of the company area. Just a wooden structure with a canvas roof, no guards. Nobody thought twice about combat engineers accessing equipment at odd hours. Half the work happened at night anyway. Inside, captured German ordnance sat in wooden crates near the back, poorly organized, mostly forgotten. The kind of stuff that gets picked up during advances and left to gather dust because nobody quite knows what to do with it. Mickey found what he needed in the third crate. 4 shoe mines, German shoe mines. The shoe mine 42 was a masterpiece of efficient design, 8 inches in diameter, wooden pressure plate on top, just 4 pounds total weight, but packed with enough TNT to blow a leg off at the knee or collapse a bunker entrance if placed right. He lifted the first one out carefully, examined it in the dim light from his hooded flashlight. The fuse housing was on the bottom. Standard ZZ-42 igniter. Pull the cord and you had 8 seconds before detonation. 8 seconds was fine if you were laying mines in a field and walking away. 8 seconds was useless if you wanted to throw the mine at a target. Mickey pulled out his wire cutters. His hands remembered this. Not from the army, from the coal mines. From sitting with his father at 14 years old, learning to trim fuse cord to exact lengths. Wei Ming's voice in his head. Too long, the charge wastes itself. Too short, you die. You measure twice, you cut once. You trust your math. The regulations were explicit about this. Never tamper with explosive devices. Never modify fuses. Never adjust detonation mechanisms outside authorized facilities with proper supervision. Mickey thought about Jimmy Kowalski, about a photograph of a 16-year-old girl who would never see her brother again, about 47 men who might die tomorrow if those sniper positions weren't neutralized. He cut the fuse. The work was delicate. The powder train inside the fuse cord burned at a specific rate, roughly 1 second per inch, give or take variations in powder density and humidity. A standard 8-second fuse was about 8 inches long. Mickey needed 3 seconds, maybe 3.5 to account for the throwing time. He measured by feel, fingers remembering the texture of blasting cord from the anthracite mines, the slight grittiness of the outer casing, the way it crimped when you bent it. Cut it too short and the mine would detonate in his hand. Too long and it would hit the ground before exploding, might roll away, might bury itself in mud and waste the charge. 3.25 inches. He cut precisely. Attached the shortened fuse to the igniter housing. Crimped it tight with a special tool. Tested the pull cord gently. It moved smooth. Would spark when yanked hard. 1 mine modified. 3 to go. Mickey worked methodically. No rushing. Each cut precise. Each crimp tested. His hands were steady despite everything. Despite the knowledge that one slip would turn him into red mist. Despite the knowledge that even if he succeeded tonight, Captain Harrison might shoot him personally at dawn. The second mine took 12 minutes. The third took 10. By the fourth, his fingers remembered the exact pressure needed, the exact length, the exact crimp tension. When he finished, he had 4 shoe mines with 3-second fuses wrapped carefully in cloth and packed in his field bag. He also had powder residue under his fingernails and the chemical smell of TNT in his nostrils. He checked his watch. 11:47. He'd been in the depot 32 minutes. Nobody had come by. Nobody had seen him. Mickey walked back to his foxhole, sat down, pulled out the photograph of Jimmy and Sophie that he'd kept, looked at it for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep for 2 hours. Tried and failed. Just lay there going over the calculations in his head, the physics, the angles, the timing. At 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleep, stood, checked his gear, loaded the 4 modified mines into his pack with extreme care. Each one wrapped separately, each one positioned so it wouldn't bump against the others. Lieutenant Patterson appeared out of the darkness at 2:12. Mickey froze. Patterson looked at him, looked at the pack. His eyes went to the shape of the mines visible through the canvas. "Where are you going, Chen?" "To end this, sir." "With what?" Mickey opened the pack slightly. "Let Patterson see the mines." Patterson's face went white even in the darkness. "Jesus Christ, you modified the fuses." Not a question, a statement. "Yes, sir." Patterson stood there for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Then he spoke quietly. You'll kill yourself. Maybe. Or I saved 47 lives. I should stop you right now. Yes, sir, you should. The silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the distance, a flare went up over no man's land. Brief green light, then darkness again. You have until 0400, Patterson said finally. If those positions aren't neutralized, Captain Harrison will have both our asses. And if I die out there, then I'll tell them you disobeyed orders. Your family gets your pension. Mickey nodded once. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just don't miss. Patterson walked away, disappeared into the darkness, left Mickey alone with 4 modified minds and a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. At 2:30 in the morning, Mickey began his crawl toward German lines. The ground between American and German positions was 200 yards of nothing. Open field, a few shell craters, some scattered debris from previous fighting. No real cover, just dirt and darkness and the constant possibility of a flare, turning night into day. Mickey moved slowly, painfully slowly, every movement calculated, elbows pulling him forward 6 inches at a time, knees pushing, body flat against the cold earth. The smell hit him first. Wet soil, old blood, cordite residue, the particular stink of a battlefield that's been fought over for weeks. His uniform soaked through with mud within the first 10 yards. His hands numb, his breathing loud in his own ears. He used every dip in the terrain, every crater, every slight fold in the ground. Moved during the moments when German voices were loudest, when they were talking among themselves and not listening outward. Froze absolutely still when the voices stopped. Distance is strange when you're crawling through darkness toward men who want to kill you. 200 yards feels like 2 miles. Every yard takes forever. Every sound seems amplified. The scrape of cloth on grass, the clink of equipment, the wet sound of mud squelching. Mickey could see the farmhouse now. 200 yards became 150, became 100, became 75. He could make out windows on the second floor, could see the occasional shadow of movement, could see rifle barrels catching moonlight when the clouds broke. 2 snipers in that farmhouse. Young men probably, maybe 20 years old, maybe veterans from the Russian front. No way to know. Didn't matter. They'd killed 6 Americans this week, would kill 47 more tomorrow if Mickey failed. He reached a collapsed stone wall at 50 yards from the farmhouse, stopped, caught his breath. His whole body ached from the crawl. His knees felt like ground glass. His elbows were raw, but he was close enough now. Close enough to see the target clearly. Close enough that a good throw would reach. Close enough to die if they spotted him. Mickey pulled the first mine from his pack, unwrapped it carefully, found the igniter cord. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, from anticipation, from knowing that the next 30 seconds would either validate 3 months of calculations or prove him spectacularly wrong. He struck the igniter cord against a rough stone. It sparked, caught, started burning with that particular hiss of fast-burning powder. 3 seconds. Mickey stood, exposed, visible. If anyone in that farmhouse looked down right now, he was dead. His arm cocked back. 20 years of muscle memory. Throwing rocks at rats in mine shafts at 14. Playing baseball in high school. The physics ingrained in bone and tendon. He focused on the second-floor window. Calculated the arc. 70 yards horizontal, 20 feet vertical. 4-pound weight. Slight wind from the west. Adjust trajectory 3 degrees right. He threw. The mine spun through the darkness. A black shape against a black sky. For one terrible half-second, Mickey thought he'd miscalculated, that it would fall short, that 3 months of work would end in failure. Then it disappeared through the window. 2.7 seconds of flight time. The explosion was massive, far louder than Mickey expected, brighter, more violent. The entire second floor of the farmhouse erupted outward. Wooden beams splintered into flying shrapnel. Stone cracked. Fire bloomed from both windows simultaneously, fed by old timber and whatever ammunition the Germans had stored up there. Voices screamed in German. Someone shouted orders. Boots running on wooden floors. Mickey was already moving, already pulling the second mine from his pack, already igniting the fuse. No time to think, no time to process. Pure action now. The adjacent window, the second sniper position. He could see movement there. Someone trying to understand what had just happened, trying to see through smoke and fire. Mickey threw again. This one was perfect. Sailed through the window like a fastball crossing the plate. Detonated inside the room with that same massive blast. The second explosion finished what the first started. The roof collapsed inward. The entire structure groaned. Fire spread fast through the old building, climbing walls, finding wood. No more shooting from the farmhouse. No more movement in those windows. Just fire and smoke and the sound of burning. Behind Mickey, German soldiers were shouting, organizing, running toward the farmhouse to see what happened. But they were looking at the fire, at the chaos, not at the lone American combat engineer turning toward the church tower 280 yards distant. Mickey ran. The church sat on a slight rise. Stone construction, bell tower rising 60 feet above the main structure. Perfect sniper position, commanding view of the entire American front. 280 yards was too far for an accurate throw. Mickey knew that, had known it when he planned this. But there was a drainage ditch that angled closer. That would give him covered approach to within 90 yards. His boots splashed through standing water. His breathing came hard. Behind him, Germans were still focused on the farmhouse, on the fire, on trying to understand what kind of weapon had done that. He reached the end of the ditch. 90 yards from the church now, still too far. The bell tower window was small, maybe 4 feet wide. Hitting it from 90 yards in darkness would take more luck than skill. Mickey crawled forward through open ground, completely exposed. If the sniper in that tower looked down, if anyone spotted him, he was dead. But everyone was looking at the farmhouse fire, at the chaos, at the unexpected. He reached a burned-out tractor 70 yards from the church. Close enough. This was as close as he could get without being seen. Mickey pulled the third mine, lit the fuse. 3 seconds starting now. The church bell tower was a vertical shot, 60 feet tall, narrow window opening. This throw would be harder than the farmhouse. Higher arc, more spin, longer flight time. Mickey had thrown rocks at birds as a kid, in the coal mines up in the shaft where sparrows nested. Never hit many, but he'd learned the technique, learned the feel of a high arc throw. He threw upward, maximum force, perfect release. Watched the mine tumble through the air. 3 seconds that felt like 30. Rising, arcing, falling, threading toward that narrow window opening. It went through. The explosion blew out all 4 sides of the tower simultaneously. The bell itself rang once, a broken, discordant sound, then crashed down through the church roof with a noise like the end of the world. Flames erupted from the tower opening. The stone structure cracked. The entire top of the tower collapsed inward. The sniper never fired again, never even knew what hit him. Mickey stood there in the darkness, breathing hard, watching 3 fires burn. Farmhouse, church, the night sky orange with reflected light. 3 positions, 3 throws, 3 successes. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Mickey spun, reached for his carbine. Expected German soldiers, expected to die right here after succeeding, expected everything except what he actually saw. Lieutenant Patterson, Captain Harrison, 4 other American soldiers. All of them staring at the burning buildings with expressions somewhere between shock and disbelief. Harrison's face was completely unreadable. Patterson spoke first. "Chen, what in the actual hell did you just do?" Mickey looked at the fires, at the dawn starting to break over the Ruhr River, at the German positions that were now just ash and smoke. "My job, sir. Remove the obstacles. If you served in World War II, or if your father or grandfather did, you know what it meant to see the impossible happen, to watch a single soldier do what an entire artillery battery couldn't. Many of you watching probably remember hearing stories like this around the dinner table, stories of innovation, of men who thought differently. If you have those stories, share them in the comments. These memories matter. This history matters. And please, hit that subscribe button. There's more to Mickey Chen's story. Much more. Captain Harrison stepped forward. For a long moment, he said nothing, just looked at Mickey, then at the fires, then back at Mickey. His face showed the war happening inside him, the trauma from Sicily fighting against the evidence of his own eyes, the doctrine he'd clung to for 2 years crumbling against the reality of 3 destroyed enemy positions. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Sergeant Williams, make a note. Private Chen reports to battalion headquarters at 0700 hours. We need to discuss his methodology. Mickey's stomach dropped. Here it came. The court-martial, the charges, the punishment for breaking every rule. But Patterson was grinning, actually grinning. Begging the captain's pardon, sir. But I think what Private Chen needs is a medal and a teaching assignment. Harrison turned to Patterson. Their eyes met. Another long silence. Then Harrison did something unexpected. Something that showed the good officer beneath the trauma. He smiled. Just slightly. Just enough. We'll discuss that at headquarters, Lieutenant. Dismissed. At 9:47 in the morning, exactly as planned, the company advanced across open ground toward the Ruhr River. Not a single shot was fired from the German positions. The snipers were dead. The positions were ash. 47 men crossed safely. 0 casualties. Mickey walked with them, his mind already racing ahead to the meeting at headquarters, to whatever consequences were waiting. He thought about Jimmy Kowalski, about the garage they'd never opened together, about photographs of a 16-year-old girl Mickey would never meet. He'd broken the rules, violated doctrine, risked court-martial, and he'd kept 47 men alive. That felt like a fair trade. At 7 in the morning, Mickey stood outside the battalion headquarters tent. His uniform was still muddy from the night crawl. His hands still smelled like explosive residue. He'd cleaned up as best he could with cold water and a rag, but there was only so much you could do. Inside the tent, he could hear voices. Harrison, Patterson, someone else he didn't recognize. The conversation was muffled, but the tone was heated. Finally, a sergeant emerged and gestured him inside. The tent was cramped, lit by a single kerosene lamp despite the morning light outside. Captain Harrison sat behind a folding table covered in maps and reports. Lieutenant Patterson stood to one side, and beside him was a major Mickey had never seen before. Older, maybe 50, combat infantry badge, Purple Heart ribbon, engineering insignia. Private Chen, Harrison said formally. This is Major Thomas Brennan, 3rd Army Combat Engineering Division. Mickey saluted. Brennan returned it casually. At ease, son. I've been hearing some interesting things about your activities last night. Brennan picked up a piece of paper from the table. Patterson's after-action report. 3 enemy positions neutralized, 0 friendly casualties, method of engagement, and I quote, modified German shoe mines deployed via manual throw with shortened fuses. Brennan looked up. That about accurate? Yes, sir. You realize that tampering with explosive devices is a court-martial offense? Yes, sir. You realize that unauthorized use of captured enemy equipment violates multiple regulations? Yes, sir. You realize that conducting an unsanctioned night assault without proper authorization could be classified as abandoning your position? Mickey hesitated. This was the trap, the legal justification for throwing him in stockade. Sir, Lieutenant Patterson authorized me to neutralize the positions. Lieutenant Patterson authorized you to neutralize positions. He did not authorize you to modify explosives, violate safety protocols, or invent entirely new combat techniques that appear nowhere in any field manual written since 1918. Silence. Mickey had no answer for that, because Brennan was absolutely right. Harrison spoke up. Major, if I may, Private Chen saved 47 men yesterday. His methods were unorthodox, but the results speak for themselves. Captain, I'm not disputing the results. I'm questioning whether we want to encourage this kind of reckless innovation. What happens when some other private decides to modify explosives and blows himself up? What happens when someone tries this technique without Chen's apparent skill and kills friendly forces? Patterson cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, we've been using the same mine warfare doctrine since the Great War. Static deployment, defensive positioning, predictable patterns. The Germans have figured us out. They avoid our minefields. They bypass our defensive positions. Maybe we need some reckless innovation. Brennan was quiet for a moment. He looked at Mickey again, studying him. Where'd you learn to throw like that, son? Scranton coal mines, sir. Used to throw rocks at rats. Played some baseball in high school. And the explosive modification. Where'd you learn that? Same place, sir. Setting demolition charges in mine shafts. You learn to calculate fuse times pretty carefully when the ceiling's about to come down on your head. Brennan nodded slowly. His expression shifted. Something changed behind his eyes. My father was a coal miner, he said quietly. Anthracite country, Pennsylvania. He died in a collapse when I was 12. Cave in because the company foreman insisted they follow the blasting manual, even though my father told him the seam was unstable. The tent went very quiet. My father understood something the foreman didn't, that sometimes the manual is wrong, that sometimes you have to trust the man who knows the darkness. Brennan looked at Harrison, then at Patterson, then back at Mickey. Gentlemen, I'm going to make a decision that will probably get me reprimanded by division command. He stood up, straightened. Captain Harrison, you are not going to court-martial Private Chen. You are going to promote him to corporal and assign him to training duties immediately. Harrison blinked. Sir? We're losing this war on innovation, Captain. The Germans have better tactics, better coordination, better adaptation. We're following doctrine written when nobody had seen a tank or a combat aircraft. If we want to win, we need men who think like Corporal Chen here. Men who see problems and solve them instead of waiting for some staff officer in Paris to update the manual. He turned to Mickey. Here's what's going to happen, Corporal Chen. You're going to spend the next 2 weeks teaching your technique to every combat engineer in 3rd Army. You're going to demonstrate it. You're going to train them on fuse modification, throwing technique, target selection, and you're going to document everything so we can write it into official doctrine. Mickey felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Sir, I'm not a teacher. You're a coal miner who figured out how to kill 3 enemy snipers with captured mines and a good throwing arm. That makes you more qualified than half the instructors at Fort Belvoir. Brennan headed for the tent exit, paused at the flap. One more thing, Corporal. Don't ever modify explosives without proper authorization again. If you have ideas about new techniques, you bring them to Lieutenant Patterson first. If you freelance like this again, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of the war cleaning latrines in Casablanca. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Brennan left. The tent flap fell closed behind him. Harrison looked at Mickey with an expression that was equal parts annoyance and grudging respect. Dismissed, Corporal. Get that training document written. Mickey saluted, walked out into the morning sunlight, his head spinning, not court-martialed, promoted, teaching. He looked at his hands. Still smelled like explosives. Still had powder residue under the nails. Thought about Jimmy, about the last thing his friend had said. Don't follow the rules that kill us. Mickey had broken the rules, and somehow, impossibly, he was still here. He pulled out the photograph. Jimmy and Sophie. Looked at it for a long moment. I did it. Jim, he whispered, broke every damn rule, and they're making me teach it. Somewhere, he thought, Jimmy Kowalski was probably laughing. The story was just beginning. 2 weeks became 4. 4 weeks became 6. Through March and April and into May of 1945, Corporal Michael Chen stood in front of groups of combat engineers on a makeshift range outside battalion headquarters, teaching men how to turn defensive weapons into offensive ones. The first session was March 22nd. 23 engineers assembled, most of them older than Mickey, most of them skeptical. A 21-year-old kid with Asian features was going to teach them something the Army hadn't figured out in 3 years of war? The doubt showed on their faces. Lieutenant Patterson introduced him. Corporal Chen neutralized 3 enemy positions 72 hours ago. 3 throws, 3 hits, 0 friendly casualties. I suggest you listen to what he has to say. Mickey stood in front of them, feeling every bit as young and uncertain as he actually was. These were men with years of combat experience, men who'd been setting charges and clearing minefields since North Africa. Who was he to teach them anything? But then he thought about Jimmy, about Brennan and Martinez, about the farmhouse and the church tower, about 47 men who walked across open ground without being shot. He began. The shoe mine weighs 4 pounds. Standard fuse gives you 8 seconds from ignition to detonation. That's fine for laying mines in a field. It's useless for hitting a target. He held up a captured German mine, showed them the fuse housing. You need 3 seconds, maybe 3.5. That gives you time to throw, time for the mine to reach the target, time for it to detonate on impact or just before. One of the engineers, a corporal from Boston named James Donnelly, spoke up. How do you know it won't blow up in your hand? Because you measure twice and cut once. Because you trust the physics. Because you practice with dummy charges until you know exactly what 3 seconds feels like. Mickey demonstrated the fuse modification, step by step, explaining the burn rate of the powder train, the importance of the crimp, the safety protocols, how one wrong cut meant losing your hand or worse. Then he showed them the throwing technique. Set up a mock window 70 yards away, lit a modified mine, low powder training charge, threw it. The mine arced through the air, spun end over end, dropped through the window opening, detonated with a sharp crack, direct hit. The skepticism evaporated. You could see it happen. See the moment these experienced combat engineers realized this crazy kid had actually figured something out. Donnelly asked, "Can you do that again?" Mickey did it again. 68 yards this time. Another direct hit. If I can do it, you can do it. It's just physics and practice. They started taking notes. The training wasn't easy. The technique required precision that most men didn't have naturally. Required practice, required patience. Day 3, Private Eddie Russo from Brooklyn cut a fuse too short. The mine was a dummy charge, low powder for training, but it still detonated in his hand during a practice throw. Burned his palm, scared him badly enough that he almost quit. Mickey worked with him individually that night, showed him the measurement technique again, made him practice on dead fuses 20 times before trying another live one. This is why we practice with training charges, Mickey said. Better to learn the lesson now than in combat. Russo got it right the next day. His first successful throw traveled 62 yards and hit within 3 feet of the target. He grinned like a kid who just hit his first home run. By day 10, 23 engineers could modify fuses safely. By day 14, 18 of them could throw accurately at 50 yards. By day 20, 12 could hit targets at 70 yards with reasonable consistency. Corporal Donnelly was the best. Boston Irish, 25 years old, hands like a bricklayer. He could hit a window opening at 80 yards 3 times out of 3. Mickey made him an assistant instructor. Sergeant Paul Martinez struggled. No relation to the Hector Martinez who died in February, but the name haunted Mickey every time he said it. This Martinez was from Texas, 28, strong as an ox but couldn't get the release timing right. Threw too hard, too flat. The mines would sail past the target or fall short. Mickey worked with him after hours. It's not about strength, it's about the arc, about letting physics do the work. Martinez improved slowly. By the end of the first month, he could hit at 60 yards. Not great, but good enough to be useful. The nightmares started in week 2. Mickey would lie in his bunk and see the farmhouse exploding, see the church tower collapsing, see faces in those windows, young faces, German boys who'd never go home. He'd killed 3 men. Maybe more if there had been others in those buildings. Killed them efficiently, professionally, without hesitation. In the coal mines, his father had taught him that sometimes you had to break rules to keep men alive. But Wei Ming had never said anything about what it felt like to be the one who dealt death instead of preventing it. One night, Patterson found him sitting outside at 3 in the morning, staring at nothing. "You okay, Chen?" "I killed 3 men, sir. I see their faces." Patterson sat down beside him, pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Mickey. Mickey didn't smoke, but took it anyway. "You also saved 47, Patterson said. "That's the math that matters. Does it balance out?" "I don't know, son. But what you're teaching now, that's going to save hundreds more, maybe thousands. That has to mean something." Mickey wasn't sure it did, but he kept teaching anyway. Because what else could he do? Jimmy was still dead. Brennan and Martinez were still dead. The only way to honor them was to make sure their deaths meant something, to make sure other men didn't die the same way. By April 30th, 48 combat engineers had been trained in the technique. By May 7th, the number had grown to 63. The word spread through informal channels, engineer to engineer, company to company, battalion to battalion. Men who'd watched friends die to enemy positions they couldn't reach suddenly had a new tool, a way to fight back, a way to take the initiative instead of just reacting. And they used it. April 9th, Corporal James Donnelly deployed with his unit near Kassel. A German MG-42 machine gun nest had pinned down two entire companies in a valley. Artillery couldn't reach it. The position was too well protected. Infantry assaults had failed twice with heavy casualties. Donnelly approached under cover of darkness, got within 70 yards, used Mickey's technique, 3 throws, 3 modified shoe mines, 3 direct hits. The machine gun nest ceased to exist. 36 men crossed the valley safely the next morning. 0 casualties. Donnelly's after-action report mentioned innovative mine deployment as per recent training protocols, 3 sentences in a 5-page document. But the word spread anyway. April 23rd. Sergeant Paul Martinez, the one from Texas who'd struggled so much in training, destroyed a fortified German observation post near Leipzig. The post had been directing artillery fire on American positions for 3 days, cost them 17 casualties and prevented any advance in that sector. Martinez got within 80 yards, 2 throws, both direct hits. The observation post and everyone in it disappeared in fire and smoke. German artillery coordination collapsed. The sector went quiet. American forces advanced 2 miles that afternoon. Martinez wrote Mickey a letter. "Your technique saved my whole battalion. We'd still be stuck in that valley if not for what you taught us. Thank you." Mickey read the letter 3 times, tried to feel pride, mostly felt tired. May 2nd, Private Eddie Russo, the kid from Brooklyn who'd burned his hand in training, took out a sniper position in a bombed-out factory outside Dresden. The sniper had killed 11 Americans over 3 days, made that sector of the line essentially impassable during daylight. Russo approached at dawn, single throw, 75 yards, perfect accuracy. The sniper never fired again. Russo's report was brief. Enemy sniper position eliminated via unconventional ordnance delivery. That's all it said. No mention of Mickey. No mention of the training. Just results. The reports kept coming. Success after success. By the end of April, Mickey had documentation of 30 confirmed enemy positions neutralized using his technique. Estimated American lives saved, over 200. And those were just the ones he knew about. How many others had used it and never filed a report? The Germans noticed. May 7th, 1945. Intelligence intercepted a German radio transmission from a Wehrmacht unit near Leipzig. The translation was rough but clear enough. Americans deploying explosives via unusual delivery method. Appears to be hand-thrown mines with impact detonation. Advise all units to avoid stationary positions with window access. Recommend increased dispersion of defensive positions. Major Brennan showed Mickey the intercept. "You didn't just change our tactics, Corporal. You changed theirs." Mickey read it twice, tried to process what it meant. German doctrine was shifting because of something he'd invented in a foxhole, because of 3 throws on a cold March night. May 14th. A captured German lieutenant was interrogated about recent tactical changes. The man was 24 years old, looked exhausted, looked like he wanted the war to be over as much as anyone. The interrogator asked about changes in defensive positioning. The lieutenant answered readily, said his unit had received orders in late April to abandon elevated stationary positions, to avoid any defensive point with window access, to maintain mobility and dispersion. When asked why, the lieutenant said, "American mine infiltration attacks. We lost 3 positions in one night near the Ruhr River in March, 2 in Kassel in April. After that, command changed the doctrine." Mickey read the interrogation transcript in Major Brennan's tent. Read it 3 times. Felt something heavy settle in his chest. He'd changed the war. Not in a big, dramatic way. No decisive battles. No turning points. Just a small shift in how both sides approached defensive positions. A tactical innovation that spread like ripples in water. And somewhere buried in those ripples were the faces of the men he'd killed. German boys who'd been following their own doctrine, who'd died because Mickey had broken his. The war was a math equation written in blood. 47 American lives saved meant 3 German lives taken. 200 American lives saved meant how many German lives taken? The equation balanced or it didn't. Mickey couldn't tell which. He thought about his father in the coal mines, about Wei Ming saying, "You trust your math. You keep men alive." But the math got complicated when keeping your men alive meant killing theirs. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Mickey stood in a dusty French town square with the rest of the battalion, listening to the announcement over a crackling radio. Men celebrated, cried, got drunk on liberated cognac, hugged each other and shouted and sang. Mickey sat alone on the steps of a destroyed building, thought about Jimmy Kowalski, about the garage they'd never open, about all the men, American and German, who died in the last 4 years. The celebration felt hollow. Victory was good. Peace was good. But it didn't bring anyone back. Lieutenant Patterson found him there an hour into the celebration. "You did good, Chen. Your friend would be proud." Mickey looked up. "Would he? I became a better killer. That's all." Patterson sat down beside him. "You became a saver of lives. There's a difference." "Is there?" "I think so, but I understand if you can't see it right now." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the celebration, watching the sun set over a France that was finally, truly free. "What are you going to do when you get home?" Patterson asked. "Go back to the mines. My father's getting old. He needs help." "You ever think about staying in? Army could use men like you, men who think different." Mickey shook his head. "I've done my part, sir. Time to go home." Patterson nodded, didn't argue. Just pulled out an envelope and handed it to Mickey. "From Major Brennan. Your discharge papers are being processed. Should be home by August if the point system works out. This is something extra." Mickey opened the envelope. Inside was a single-page letter on 3rd Army letterhead. Official commendation for innovative tactical development. Signed by Major Brennan and countersigned by a colonel Mickey had never heard of. The letter praised his extraordinary initiative and technical expertise, resulting in significant tactical advantage and preservation of American lives. It was dry, bureaucratic. The kind of language that stripped all the blood and fire and terror out of what had actually happened. But it was in his permanent service record, proof that he'd been more than just another combat engineer who came home. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, Corporal. You saved a lot of lives. That matters more than any medal." They shook hands. Mickey folded the letter carefully, put it in his pack. Never looked at it again for 49 years. August 1945. Mickey Chen stepped off a train in Scranton, Pennsylvania. His father, Wei Ming, was waiting on the platform. 62 years old now, bent from decades underground, coughing from lungs full of coal dust. They embraced without words. Wei Ming had never been much for talking, just held his son for a long moment, then stepped back, looked at him. "You came back. That's all that matters." "Not everyone did." Wei Ming nodded, understood what Mickey wasn't saying, picked up Mickey's duffel bag despite Mickey's protest, walked toward the parking lot where an old truck waited. The anthracite mine gave Mickey his old job back. Blasting foreman, same position his father held, same work-setting charges in seams 200 feet underground. The pay was decent. The work was familiar. The darkness felt safe after years of open combat. Mickey didn't talk about the war. When people asked, he said he'd been a combat engineer, did some demolition work, came home in one piece. That was enough. He never mentioned the mines, never mentioned the farmhouse or the church tower, never mentioned 47 men who crossed safely or the technique that had spread through 3rd Army. Never mentioned the nightmares that woke him up 3 nights a week for the next 15 years. The coal mines were different from combat, but the principles were the same. Calculate the charge, trust the physics, keep men alive. Mickey was good at it, better than good. In 42 years of setting blasting charges underground, he never had an accident, never miscalculated a powder load, never brought down a ceiling or injured a man. The younger miners called him Old Careful, meant it as a compliment. Mickey found it ironic. Once they'd called him reckless, now careful, same man, different context. He corresponded with Lieutenant Patterson for a few years. Patterson wrote from Fort Belvoir where he was teaching engineering tactics, shared news about the technique spreading. Marine Corps adopted a modified version in 1954. NATO included it in training protocols in 1958. By 1960, it was standard doctrine for combat engineers in 17 countries. Patterson's last letter came in 1961. Your technique is everywhere now, Mick. Taught at every military engineering school in the free world. But nobody knows your name. Thought you should know it mattered. Mickey wrote back. Short letter. It mattered that Jimmy didn't die for nothing. That's enough. The correspondence faded after that. Patterson retired, moved to Florida. They exchanged Christmas cards for a few years. Then even that stopped. Life moved on. 1947. Mickey married Catherine O'Brien, Irish girl, 23 years old, nurse at Scranton General Hospital. She was smart and kind and never pushed him to talk about things he didn't want to talk about. She asked about the war once, just once, early in their relationship. What did you do over there? What I had to. Don't want to talk about it. She never asked again, respected his silence, married him anyway. They honeymooned in the Poconos, 2 days, all they could afford, came back to a small apartment above a grocery store, built a life that had nothing to do with mines or wars or German snipers in farmhouse windows. 3 children, Thomas born in 1949, Sarah in 1952, Robert in 1956. Mickey taught them all to throw properly. Rocks at targets, baseballs at strike zones, spent hours in the backyard showing them the physics of a good throw, the arc, the release, the follow-through. Never told them why technique mattered. Never mentioned that he'd once thrown objects that exploded, that those throws had saved lives and taken them. Thomas asked him once, "Dad, were you good at baseball?" "Good enough. Practice your release." That was all he said. The Army published an updated field manual for combat engineers in 1952. Section 7, subsection C detailed offensive mine deployment techniques. The text was clinical, precise, explained fuse modification procedures, throwing mechanics, target selection, safety protocols. Nowhere in those pages did it mention Michael Chen. No footnote, no acknowledgement. Just the technique stripped of its origin story. Doctrine now, official, bloodless. Mickey never saw that manual, never looked for it, wouldn't have cared if he had. He worked in the mines until 1987, 42 years breathing coal dust, set thousands of blasting charges, kept hundreds of men safe, retired at 64 with lungs that rattled when he breathed and hands that never stopped shaking slightly. Spent his retirement with grandchildren, 7 total, taught them to throw too, taught them to think about physics, about angles, about the importance of precision. Never told them about the war. Michael Chen died on November 3, 1994, at Scranton General Hospital. Lung cancer, 71 years old. His wife Catherine was there, his 3 children, 4 of his 7 grandchildren. His last words to his grandson David, 16 years old, were quiet. Be good, be smart, don't follow rules that get people killed. David didn't understand. Thought his grandfather was confused. Medication talking. Catherine understood. She'd found Patterson's letters years ago, read them in secret, never told Mickey she knew, just held his hand and understood. The obituary in the Scranton Times-Tribune ran on November 5th. Michael Chen, 71, of Scranton, died Wednesday of lung cancer, survived by wife Catherine, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. Served U.S. Army 1942 to 1945, European theater. Worked as blasting foreman at Anthracite Mine No. 7 for 42 years. Known as a skilled engineer and devoted family man. Viewing Tuesday at McGrath Funeral Home. Burial Thursday at Dunmore Cemetery. That was it. 12 lines. No mention of farmhouses or church towers. No mention of techniques or lives saved. No mention of innovation that changed NATO doctrine. Just a coal miner who served his country and came home and lived a quiet life and died. The funeral was small, family, a few old miners. Patterson sent flowers from Florida, but didn't attend, too sick to travel. They buried Mickey at Dunmore Cemetery on a cold November morning. Simple granite headstone. Catherine chose the inscription. Michael Chen, 1923 to 1994, beloved father and husband. Nothing about the war, nothing about heroism, nothing about the 8 minutes that changed everything, exactly how Mickey would have wanted it. If you've stayed with this story for this long, you understand something important. Real heroism doesn't always come with parades, doesn't always get remembered. Sometimes the men who change history do it quietly, do it without recognition, do it and go back to their lives and never speak of it again. If you have a father or grandfather who served and never talked about it, leave a comment. Tell us their name. These silent heroes deserve to be remembered. And please subscribe to this channel. These stories matter. This history matters. West Point Military Academy, Spring 2003. Dr. Robert Morrison, military historian, was researching World War II combat engineering innovations for a book nobody would probably read. He was deep in the archives when he found it. A report from 3rd Army, 1945. Tactical analysis of mine warfare developments in the European theater of operations. Buried in an appendix was a single paragraph. Initial development of mobile mine deployment technique attributed to Corporal Michael Chen, 23rd Combat Engineer Battalion, March 1945. Techniques subsequently adopted by division-level training protocols and demonstrated significant tactical effectiveness in final months of European campaign. One paragraph, 37 words. The only official acknowledgement that Michael Chen had ever existed in the context of military innovation. Morrison was intrigued, started digging, cross-referenced the name with after-action reports. Found Patterson's training documents archived at Fort Belvoir. Found interviews with surviving veterans who'd been trained in the technique. Found Donnelly's account of Kassel. Found Martinez's account of Leipzig. Found a dozen other reports that mentioned the technique but never mentioned the name. He tracked down Patterson in a Florida nursing home. The old lieutenant was 86. Memory fading, but he remembered Mickey. "Best combat engineer I ever served with," Patterson said. "Saved my whole company. Probably saved hundreds of others. Army never gave him credit. He never wanted it anyway. Just wanted to go home to his father." Morrison published his findings in the Journal of Military Innovation. Fall 2003. 12-page article titled "Forgotten Innovators, Combat Engineering Tactics in the ETM." 4 pages were devoted to Michael Chen. Detailed reconstruction of the March 18th night operation. Technical analysis of the fuse modification technique. Impact assessment of lives saved directly and indirectly. Current usage in modern military training. The article's readership was 43 people. Obscure academic journal. No popular press picked it up. No documentaries got made. Mickey's story stayed buried except for those 43 readers. One of them was David Chen, 25 years old, high school history teacher in Philadelphia. Got an email from a colleague. "Dave, is this your grandfather?" David read the article 3 times, sat in stunned silence. His grandfather? Old, careful grandpa who taught him to throw a baseball and never talked about the war? That man had done this? He drove to Scranton the next weekend, stood at the grave in Dunmore Cemetery. Simple granite headstone. Beloved father and husband. Nothing about the 47 men who crossed a river. Nothing about 3 perfect throws in darkness. Nothing about rules broken to save lives. David thought about adding something. A plaque, maybe. Some recognition of what his grandfather had actually done. Then he thought about the old man who taught him physics through baseball, who'd never wanted attention, who'd come home from the war and worked in the mines and raised a family, and never once mentioned being a hero. "It's fine as it is," David said out loud to the headstone. "Some men change wars quietly. Some innovations spread without fanfare. Some heroes die without recognition. That doesn't make them less important. It just makes them honest." David started teaching the story in his classes, not from the textbook because it wasn't in any textbook, from Morrison's article, from family stories, from the 1 paragraph in the archive report. Students would ask why Mickey Chen wasn't famous. David would answer, "Because real heroes don't need recognition. They just do what needs doing." One student asked, "Would you be proud if your grandpa did that?" David smiled. "I'm proud he was my grandpa. What he did in the war was important, but what mattered most was he came home and taught my dad to throw a baseball. That's the legacy I have." Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, 2024. Combat engineers still learn offensive mine placement techniques. The instructors teach without knowing the origin. This technique was developed during World War II, they say. No name attached. The knowledge persists. The man forgotten. The real numbers tell the story. Mickey's direct actions saved 47 lives. His students saved hundreds more. The technique, spread across 80 years and dozens of militaries, has saved thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. Countries using variations of the technique, 31 in modern NATO and partner nations. Academic papers mentioning the technique, 23. Papers mentioning Michael Chen. 1. Catherine Chen is 97 years old now, living in an assisted care facility in Scranton. A local newspaper interviewed her in 2023 for a feature on World War II veterans' families. The reporter asked if she was upset that Mickey never got famous. Catherine smiled. He didn't want famous. He wanted to come home. But he did something extraordinary. He did what he had to. Then he came home and raised 3 good children and taught 7 grandchildren to throw straight and think clearly. The Army knows what he did. The men he saved knew. That was enough for him. It's enough for me. The grave at Dunmore Cemetery still has the same simple headstone. Still says Michael Chen, 1923 to 1994. Beloved father and husband. But sometimes, especially around March 18th, someone leaves a small American flag. No note, no explanation, just a flag stuck in the ground beside the headstone. From someone who knows. From someone who learned the technique. From someone whose life was saved by an innovation born in desperation on a cold March night in 1945. Mickey Chen never wanted to be a hero. He wanted to save his friends. He couldn't save Jimmy, but he saved 47 others and taught others to save hundreds more. The coal mines of Scranton don't teach military doctrine, but they teach you about pressure, about thinking fast when the ceiling's coming down, about doing what works instead of what the manual says. Mickey learned those lessons at 14, applied them at 21, lived with them for 71 years. No parades, no medals, no chapter in textbooks. Just a simple grave in Pennsylvania and a technique that still saves lives 80 years later. Some legacies are written in marble, some are written in the blood they didn't spill. Mickey's is the latter, and that's exactly how he would have wanted it. The barrel roll mine trick, born in a foxhole, banned by doctrine, validated by necessity, spread across armies, saved thousands of lives. All because a coal miner's son decided that rules written by men who'd never crawled in darkness weren't worth following when they got good men killed. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the legacy. And now you know.